Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video. In this video, we'll be continuing on with my Redividing the Tribes series that I started with Survivor Winners at War, and I thought that was a pretty fun video idea, so we're going to continue that on here with Survivor Game Changers. So if you don't know what we're going to be doing here, we're going to take the cast of Survivor Game Changers and try to redivide the tribes into heroes versus villains. So this video will be going through the entire cast and talk about how they were portrayed in previous seasons, what their reputations were coming into the season, and where they would have landed on these two tribes. So for this video, we might as well go in elimination order. I feel like that's the easiest way to set this up. So let's do it. Let's start off with Sierra Easton. And Sierra was a tough one for me because it's like, when we look back at her season of Blood vs. Water, she was shown in a mostly positive light. And most of her content was pretty positive there. Her edit at the end of the season is listed as CPP, which is Complex Personality Positive, shown in a very positive light while also being able to show the inner workings of her strategy. And obviously you would think, oh, she's shown positively, she should be on the Heroes tribe. And then we even move on to Cambodia, where in Cambodia, I mean, she wasn't as blatantly positive as she was there, but I mean, she was given a mostly toneless edit up until her final episode where she was given some positive content there. So it's good. She's never really been shown in a negative light. However, for me, I felt like she should be on the Villains tribe. I think when we're looking at who is in this casting pool, I think the problem with Game Changers just in general is that there's a lot of kind of non-entities on this cast, like people that we didn't really know that well coming into this season. But I think knowing how well we knew Sierra by this point, a lot of her storyline being you need to play the game, a lot of her storyline being she voted out her mom, a lot of the storyline being she went to rocks. I feel like these are sort of villainous aspects, especially the voting out her mom. I feel like that alone is enough to say this person is a villain. Now, I mean, did she really vote on her mom? I mean, again, it didn't really matter. Her mom was going home anyway. However, I think based on the way that the show can portray her, I feel like putting her on the Villains tribe for me made more sense than putting her on the Heroes, especially when we have some people that we'll be talking about later that were a bit more unclassifiable. But I feel like if the person's unclassifiable, I feel like it's easier to classify them as a hero than a villain, meaning that, again, there were just less hero spots. So I felt like Sierra fit more on the Villains tribe for me. Now for Tony, and I mean, I think Tony's gotta be a villain. I don't think there's any way you could put Tony as a hero coming into Game Changers. If we look back at his edit from Cagayan, I mean, he got a very negative edit. He does have some toneless episodes, but literally out of the 14 episodes of the season, he has 8 negative episodes with 1 mixed episode, and that being the finale. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear Tony has to be a villain, mixing that in obviously with his gameplay style, where he is very flip-floppy. He's willing to turn on his alliances. He betrayed like Trish and LJ and Jeffra and like all these people that, like, again, it's very clear to me he is a villain. No real debate there. Now for Caleb, and I mean, Caleb is one of these non-entities, though I think based on what we were shown from Survivor, I think it's very clear they want him to be a hero. I mean, if we're looking at his 4-episode run, he had 3 episodes that were positive content. Mixing that in with his very ridiculously positive exit from the show. Obviously, he gets medevac from the show, but is given a very positive edit on the way out, and is even shown on the thing saying that he will play again. I think it's very clear they're trying to portray him as a hero. So for me, Caleb made it onto the Heroes tribe. Now moving on to Malcolm, and Malcolm was a bit of a tough one because I feel like he could fit either of these. Now, I do think he is mostly hero, and spoiler, I did put him on the Heroes tribe. But I do think there's an argument for him being on the Villains tribe just due to his gameplay style, the way that he looks at the game. I do think he can play the game very villainous. But again, like just looking at his previous 2 seasons at this point, I mean, he had Philippines, where he was a very clear hero on that season. Again, his edit by the end of it was CPP, and also on Caramoan, where, I mean, he wasn't given as much positive content. He was mostly toneless the entire way through, but he was the scrappy underdog for his last few episodes. And I did think, obviously, I mean, he comes out of the season being the fan favorite. And really, I do feel like you have to put Malcolm on the Heroes tribe, despite, I think if you really analyze what he did on those seasons, and also his confessionals and all this stuff, I do think there's a chance you could put him as a villain. But I think based on how the overall Survivor community viewed him after those 2 seasons, I think he's got to be a hero. Now for JT, and I mean, I think JT has to be a hero, right? I mean, he was obviously on the original Heroes vs. Villains as a hero. I mean, he's one of the biggest heroes in the history of the show in Tocantins. Now, in Heroes vs. Villains, he did switch things up. He did play a bit more villainous and was given a bit more of a negative edit. I mean, actually, really, a largely negative edit, especially by the time he goes out. But I do still think coming into Game Changers, I do think he was more memorable for his first run. I think he was still looked at as more of a hero figure for the show, so I do think for me he landed as a hero. Now for Sandra, again, Sandra was originally on the Villains tribe in the original Heroes vs. Villains, and I don't really feel like she changed much through Heroes vs. Villains. I mean, mind you, on Heroes vs. Villains she was given a very positive edit. Then she was given a very positive edit in Pearl Islands also, and she was still put on the Villains tribe. So I just think fundamentally, I think they always looked at her as more of a villainous sort of figure, and she was already labeled as a villain. So for me, I still feel like she's got to be on the Villains tribe. This is why you're getting pretty positive edits during both of her runs. Next up, we got Jeff Varner, and Jeff Varner, I think you have to put him as villain. I think it's very tough to classify Jeff Varner as a hero at any point, especially after the season. But again, like we're doing everything pre-season, pre-Game Changers. I think it's very tough to classify him as a hero. I mean, if we look at his original season in Australian Outback, he did come out of that season with a largely negative edit. He was kind of the more snarky, villainous sort of figure. And then coming into Cambodia, I mean, his edit wasn't as actively negative, but it was definitely still the type of edit of someone that was very actively playing the game, someone that was willing to flip sides, play very strategically. And again, I think because of all those things, I feel like Jeff Varner still is a villain coming into Game Changers. So for me, that one was pretty easy. Now we're on to one of the non-entities, and here we got Haley from Worlds Apart. And I really just don't know what to do with Haley because, again, she's not a hero, she's not a villain. So what do I do with her? Now, if we look at her original edit, she does come out of that edit pretty toneless. She's not given much positive or negative content the entire way through. She is given consistent content, but it's never really toned until her final episode, where she does get some positive content on the way out, largely due to the negativity that like Dan and Rodney are given, and Haley being on the opposite side of those things. But again, I just feel like there's nothing negative you can say about Haley coming into Game Changers. So for me, I did land her as a hero. But again, there's nothing really heroic about her either. But again, whatever, who cares? Let's put her on the Heroes tribe. Next up, we got Ozzy. And I think Ozzy you have that put as a hero just due to the reputation of him as being this challenge beast, this guy that plays very straightforward. I mean, like, I think just his reputational alone is one of a hero. I mean, but then again, if we look at his actual edits, I think there's a bit of a different story. I mean, he is given a positive edit in Cook Islands. I think there's no denying that. Pretty much shown positively the entire way through, outside of a couple points where he's called a bit arrogant. But then we get to Micronesia. I do think his Micronesia is a lot more negative than people remember. I mean, he is kind of looked at as like the dominant force in that season and is shown very cocky and arrogant the entire way through, which I think is something that was very clear was there during Cook Islands. I just think in Cook Islands they were much better at hiding it, and they were more incentivized to hide it than they were in Micronesia, where they didn't. But then we get to South Pacific, where in South Pacific from the merge on, he's shown in a very positive light of him winning every challenge at Redemption Island, coming back and being like the fallen angel of the season. However, his pre-merge is very negative. I mean, he's given such terrible content earlier on in that season. So overall for Ozzy, I mean, I do feel like there is justification for you calling him a villain if you really wanted to. But I do think when looking at the grand scheme of Survivor, looking at the way that he is portrayed throughout the entire series and the way that the community looks at him, I think you got to put him as a hero. Now for Debbie, and I mean, I think Debbie you got to have as a villain. I mean, looking back at her original season, she was shown largely as a joke most of the way through and was mostly given negative content. I mean, her first couple episodes were extremely negative, very over the top negative. And by the end of her run, she's also given mostly negative content. I'm really just overall, Debbie, I think coming into this, she's very much like the coach figure from Heroes vs. Villains, where Coach was put on the Villains tribe despite never really doing anything too villainous. And I think Debbie's kind of in that same sort of scenario. So for me, Debbie lands here as a villain. Next up, we got Zeke. And Zeke is a tough one because I think Zeke is one of these that I think could very much land on the Heroes Tribe. Again, he's a very bubbly sort of personality, someone that didn't really get a lot of negative content in the season. I mean, most of his content on Millennials vs. Gen X was very toneless. He got a very positive premiere, and he had a pretty mixed penultimate episode, the episode where they did go to Rocks. But besides that, he was given mostly toneless content, and because I think you would think that, oh, that probably means he's more on the hero side of things. However, I think just by the way he plays the game in a very strategic manner, a very cutthroat manner, I do think for me that lands him on the villain tribe. And again, I said this earlier, I think it's harder to fill in villain slots than it is to fill in hero slots. And due to that, I feel like Zeke is one of these people that, despite him not overly being a villain, I think he needs to be on the villains tribe just to balance out the tribes. Though, again, obviously if this was post Game Changers, I think he's very clearly a hero. I think what he goes through in Game Changers does classify him as a hero from this point forward in Survivor history. But coming out of Millennials vs. Gen X, I feel like there's enough there to land him on the villains tribe. Now for Sierra Dawn Thomas, and Sierra Dawn Thomas is another one of these that has really nothing to really go off of where to put her as a hero or a villain. Her first season, she was mostly under the radar. I mean, her edit was under the radar for most of the way through. She did have some spikes in content, like during the Joaquin boot, during the Shireen boot episode, but it's like, for the most part, she was under the radar. So I think just inherently, you would think that probably lends herself to be as a hero, just due to there's nothing villainous about her. However, I put her as a villain, and the reason for that is, one, we already have Haley as a hero, and I do think they wanted to separate the two as they both came from the same season, but also, I do think Sierra is someone that was aligned with the villains of the season. While she wasn't a villain herself, she was aligned with the Dan, the Rodneys, the Wills. She was aligned with that group that were the villains of that season, and she essentially enabled them to be the villains of that season. So I feel like for me that was justification enough to put her as a villain, especially over Haley, where I don't feel like there's anything you can say about Haley that would put her as a villain. While Sierra here, again, while this is a very minute thing, I do think that is enough to land her as a villain. Now moving on to Andrea, and Andrea is someone that I was actually leaning towards villain, just like when first thinking about it. Not because I thought she was a big villain, but just because I never looked at her super positively coming into that season. But I went back and looked at the Edgic charts, and I was completely wrong on how they portrayed her. I did not realize how positive an edit she got on Redemption Island. She comes out of that season with a CPP edit. The only person that entire season to get a CPP edit, mind you. Even Boston Rob didn't get a CPP edit. So I think that's obviously something you have to factor in. Coming into Kara Moen, where what I remember from her on Kara Moen is her being a very like sort of sketchy player, someone that sketched a lot of people out with her being so paranoid all the time. But then looking back at the edit itself, she wasn't really shown in a negative light. I mean, she was on her final episode, the episode that she goes home. Yes, she did have negative content, but for the most part, her content was actually pretty consistent the entire way through of being toneless. So, I mean, really, she has one extremely positive edit and another mostly toneless edit with nothing really actively villainous about her. So for me, I felt like she had to land as a hero. Now I'm moving on to Mikayla, and Mikayla was a tough one because I put Mikayla on the Heroes Tribe when I did my Heroes vs. Villains casting video, and I saw some people disagree with that. So obviously I went back and looked at the Edgic chart for Mikayla, and Mikayla's gotten a really rocky edit. I mean, she has some positivity, a lot of positivity towards the end of her run. Her final episode is extremely positive. Her middle sort of streak there where she's like very good at challenges, she's given very positive content. But she does start off a bit rocky. She does get some negative content on that second episode with her fighting with Figgy, and she does get some mixed content on her penultimate episode. So, I mean, she does have a bit of a rocky road there. I still personally say that she's a hero after Millennials vs. Gen X. One, because, again, I put Zeke on the Villains Tribe. I think they wanted to separate the two, so I do think it makes more sense to put Mikayla as a hero. But also, I feel like Mikayla came out of that season, one, looking like she was like the robbed goddess sort of player, someone that got screwed over, even though I don't think she got screwed over, but whatever. That is how people perceived her. But also, she's someone that was very good at challenges, which is a very big trait when it comes to heroes on Survivor. So I do feel like for me, Mikayla landed as a hero still. Next up, we got Saree, and I think Saree's got to be a hero. I mean, Saree's another one that there's definitely a debate for villain in the sense that the way she plays the game is a very villainous sort of style. But there's a couple things here. One, she was already on the Heroes tribe on Heroes vs. Villains. But also, I mean, if we're looking back at the edit of her season, she's been edited very positively. Going back to Panama, I mean, she comes out of that season with a CPP edit. Again, a very, extremely positive edit. Not a single bit of negativity that entire way through. And then we go to Micronesia, where she comes out of that being CP toneless, which, again, is still very good. She does get some positive content here and there. She does also get some negative content here and there. But overall, it is toneless at the end of the day. So, and then also in Heroes vs. Villains, again, given a CP edit without a tone. So it's like, for the most part, she is looked at in a positive light throughout her seasons. And considering she was on the original Heroes tribe, I feel like she still lands on the Heroes tribe on Game Changers here. Next up, we got Aubree, and Aubree was a tough one. Obviously, this is coming off of Ko Wrong, which she was shown as, again, the robbed goddess of the season, the person that should have won. And if we look at her edit, she was given a mostly toneless edit the entire way through. She did have a very mixed premiere where she had her breakdown, and she was given a very positive edit on the episode that Scott Pollard gets taken out. But outside that, mostly toneless the rest of the way. But I do think by the nature of her being the you should have won person and being someone that was very positively looked at within the community at that point in Survivor history, I do think for me she still lands as a hero. Next up, we got Ty, and I think Ty's got to be a hero. I think there's no way you could put Ty as a villain, especially after Ko Wrong. He had a streak of 4 episodes in a row that were CPP. He got the most content that season the entire way through. He did have some negativity here and there, especially when he was aligned with the Scott and the Jasons of the world. But for the most part, his edit was very positive. He definitely comes out of that season being the fan favorite, being a very well-liked figure. I think he's got to be a hero. Spoiler alert, that's the last hero on the cast, which essentially means the final 3 here are all villains. But we're obviously going to still talk through them here. So let's start off with Troyzan. And I do feel like Troyzan has a debate there on whether he's a hero or a villain. I mean, his content was mostly toneless the entire way through. He does have positive content here and there. His big episode, the episode where he says, "This is my island," all that stuff is a mixed episode overall. His final episode, he's shown as a scrappy underdog, shown in a positive light. So I do think there's merit for him being a hero. However, I decided to put him as a villain, mostly because obviously he's most known for "This is my island," saying like, "Don't F with me" to the women. So like, I feel like that's a very villainous sort of thing to do. I feel like that's really what production's going to hone in on there. So for me, I did decide to land him as a villain. Next up, we got Brad Culpepper, and come on. I love Brad Culpepper. I mean, I think on both his seasons, he's a really fun character. And I do think he got unwarranted negativity on the original Blood vs. Water. However, I think you're denying yourself if you're saying he's not a villain. Now, while he might not actually truly be the villain, he was shown in a mostly negative light on his original season and was seen by the other players as the villain. He was the person that they were berating on for taking out their loved ones. So I do think Brad Culpepper is very clearly a villain coming into Game Changers. And the last person we got here, it was a really tough one. I did not know what to do with Sarila Cena, because Sarila Cena, I think after Game Changers, is very clearly a villain. However, coming into Game Changers, her original edit was actually mostly positive, if not toneless, until her final episode. And because of that, I was like, is she a hero? And also, do they want to separate her and Tony, which means she would be on the Heroes tribe? However, I did decide to put her on the villains, and a lot of that is because, again, I think what she's most known for is the Present Sarah stuff. Her final episode, the merge episode, where she's shown in a very negative light there, where she's shown really trying to dictate things and trying to force people to do what she wants in not a great way. I mean, she's really just not shown in a great light. She obviously gets turned on because of that. And really overall, I mean, despite most of her content up until then being more of a hero style of edit, I do think that episode alone kind of lands her as a villain for me. So on the Heroes tribe, we got Ty Trang, we got Aubree Bracco, we got Saree Fields, we got Mikayla Bradshaw, we got Andrea Belke, we got Ozzy Lust, we got Haley Ford, we got JT Thomas, we got Malcolm Freeberg, and we got Caleb Reynolds. On the villains tribe, we got Sarila Cena, we got Brad Culpepper, we got Troyzan Robertson, we got Sierra Dawn Thomas, we got Zeke Smith, we got Debbie Warner, we got Jeff Varner, we got Sandra Diaz-Twine, we got Tony Velachos, and we got Sierra Easton. And to be honest, I don't think this is that unreasonable of a tribe breakdown. I think the Heroes tribe is pretty stacked. I mean, they got Malcolm, Caleb, JT, Ozzy, Andrea, Mikayla, I mean, Ty, Aubree. I mean, that's a lot of really good challenge performers there. Some relatively weak challenge performers on the villains tribe, and like Sierra, Sandra, Jeff Varner, Debbie, and these people that aren't necessarily the greatest in challenges. But I do think tribe dynamic wise, this would have been a really interesting dynamic to see the game start off on. I mean, obviously, we would have been able to see like Tony and Sarah on the same tribe coming into this. We would have been able to see Malcolm and Andrea on the same tribe. I do think this is probably a better situation for Saree coming in here. We still have the Tony and Sandra rivalry on the villains tribe. So while it's not a perfect breakdown, I do think there are actually some fun dynamics that would come from splitting the tribes up this way. But there we go. That is my redividing of the tribes for Survivor Game Changers into Heroes vs. Villains. So as you can predict, probably the next one of these that will come out would be Survivor Cambodia into Heroes vs. Villains. Obviously, after that will probably be All-Stars. Then after that, I might try to change things up, maybe bring in different themes, try out some other stuff there. I think that might be fun. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.